All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another social design community conversation brought to you in part by the Siebel Center for Design at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I'm Brandon, and I'm really delighted to have two special guests that are going to come and share their experience, their career work, and like their life journey in social impact and in design. But before we pass the popcorn over to them, just a couple of housekeeping details. This will be our agenda for today. We'll give a quick overview and then do some introductions. And then the lion's share of today will be spent talking to our guests and collecting questions from the chat from the community members and the students that are out there. And then we'll go and try to get y'all out of here in about 60 minutes or so today. So let's move forward one slide. I sit, let me silence the phone here. I actually sit within three contexts. Professional Brandon works at Amazon Web Services, supporting fintech startups by day. Brandon, the dad and the husband, supports a family of 5 there. You see my whippersnappers. And then Brandon on the right, community social impact enthusiast, is really excited to be able to teach and connect with students and with community members so that we can move our world forward. So with that, I want to pass the mic over to my co-instructor for this class, Bert. Feel free to take it away, Bert. Give a couple of nuggets about who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. I'm Bert Zhang. I'm a lecturer at Siebel Center for Design. And so that means I teach lots of classes on how to understand human needs and use creativity to make change and work with organizations to work with all their constraints and politics around making change, whether that's small or big. And some of my background, I am an amateur typeface designer, so you'll see some letters there, and a lot of what I studied in undergrad was around interactive arts, such as self-playing pianos. And I'll give that back to you, Brandon.
All right, thanks, Bert. Let's fast forward to one of my favorite slides every week, just to show the breadth of different community organizations that we've been able to connect with throughout this 16-week semester. This is week 14, but we've been able to we've really been fortunate to hear from some operators and some folks that are actually in the community doing the work, and then to marry that with design and human-centered design thinking methodologies. It's been just a treat for the last 14 weeks. So you see some of the orgs there that we've already talked to. We're going to talk to Shy by Design and represent some of Lesley Ann's work as well today. But yeah, really blessed to have been able to connect with some of these on the slide and then some that are not represented on the slide here. All right, so without further ado, let's fast forward to like the main event, and we'll do like a round of introductions. So Lesley Ann, feel free to take 2, 3, 4 minutes to give an intro to the students and the community members, who you are, where you are, what you're up to, and then we'll pass the popcorn over to Chris to do the same thing, and then jump into some Q&A here. So popcorn over to you, Lesley Ann.
All right, thank you, Brandon. So my name is Lesley Ann Noel. I am I'm an assistant professor at the College of Design at North Carolina State University. But you may hear that I have an accent. So I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm actually in Trinidad and Tobago right now. So you'll have an overseas visitor today. My background is in industrial design, but I don't know if to say but or and, but I maybe lost interest in objects and products a long time ago. And I guess that is what got me into social design, that I've been trying to figure out, okay, so what could we be using design for if we're not designing objects and services? And, can we use this design work that we do for different things? And so that interest has me working in a lot of different areas that are non-object focused, non-graphic design or artifact focused. For example, I'm in education, kind of, where I'm working with people in STEM education. That doesn't sound like social design, but it actually is. It is that we are trying to see how we can make sure there are more people of color entering STEM by using design abilities, their interest in design. So I'm designing programs around that, getting people into STEM, particularly Black teenage boys. And then also I work with someone in public health where we are using the ways that designers think and work to see if we could somehow make it easier for patients to talk about their design experience, right? We have no idea if we're going to win the Nobel Prize for this eventually, but it's like we're trying to see if we give a patient prototyping materials, for example, can that help them to talk about how horrible the healthcare system was, or so we're doing some experimental work like that. And again, you might be thinking, well, what does that have to do with social design? It is that the work that I do really focuses on access, and that access, and I'm using design methods to get people there. And so in some places, some of my work looks a little bit more like typical design, social design interventions, and some of it kind of goes more on this research side that's a little more abstract. But I'm happy to occupy this space. I hope that we have lots to talk about, and I'm going to pass it over to Chris right now.
Thanks, Lesley Ann. All right, Chris, on to you, man.
Cool. I know we're gonna have lots to talk about because Lesley Ann is one of my favorite people. So super excited to be in conversation with her and reconnecting with Brandon, who I haven't seen in a long time. So happy to be here and connect with you all as well. Chris Rudd, founder of Shy by Design, social and civic design organization based in Chicago, focused on designing anti-racist outcomes. So we work with big systems, we work with nonprofits, we do a lot in the social sector, and now starting to foray into the private sector because so many young people like yourselves have pushed them to understand that they need to be thinking about their role in society differently. And so now they're trying to figure that out. And then I also am a clinical professor of community-led design at the Institute of Design at IIT. It's a lot of ats, so forgive that. I didn't make that title. And yeah, it's interesting, like, to hear, Lesley, you say that you started with objects. I too don't care about products at all. I think that is a big problem with our society, that we're thinking about things as products rather than their use value. But I'm now starting to see the value in objects as catalysts for change. And so I'm starting to I feel like I was very much in the, all right, how do we design new systems and think about justice as the impetus for those systems. And now I'm thinking about how can objects help enable those systems to come into existence. So I love this merging. Yeah.
Yeah, love it. Well, for the folks that are out there in the audience, I think as you have questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. And I've got some ones that I prepared, but let's make it a dialogue, and feel free to throw them in there and we'll weave them in as we go. But let's press rewind a little bit. And I'm coming to you, Lesley Ann, for this one. Just what was it like kind of coming up in, not America, in Trinidad and Tobago? Talk to us about some of the inputs that kind of turned you into curious about design. Did you know at the age of 7, 8, 9, 10 that you were headed this way, or was it much later on that you got interested in kind of the social impact and kind of the design that you found yourself in now?
So I think that there maybe were like a few hints or pointers along the way. But I don't think that people would have said at age 12 that I would have been here, right? I don't even know if they would have said, if my teachers would have even have said that at 16, when I was clearly on a design path, because we actually, in Trinidad and Tobago, we choose, well, in the Caribbean, in the English speaking Caribbean, we very often start our path like at the end of middle school. You're on a path and you stick with that path for the rest of your life. So I actually started on this design path then, when I entered high school. I really was on this path that I have not quite come off of. But some things that I like to talk about, like what has got me into this place in design, because I could have been somewhere completely different in design, like interested in, for example, designing luxurious cars, or, I could have been wanting to design something else. But I think that, so I grew up in the 70s, and I grew up at a time where, so like just after the Black Power movement in Trinidad and Tobago, which was a little later than in the US. But I think that growing up in that kind of society, so this is just post-independence Trinidad, where we had like a lot of nationalism, we had a lot of people changing class at one time, so a lot of people moving from like working classes into middle classes at the same time. And, that starts to help you see the need for change, because it depends on what household you grow up in, right? But like, I know that my parents, one generation ago, were in a lot of poverty like everybody else. And it is that somebody, so my family was like pro-government. So I mean, I guess I have to say that in case anyone on the call is like, what is she talking about? But we had then this prime minister who was pretty visionary about change, right? And it's that thing of, okay, we're gonna move all of these people out of abject poverty into a better lifestyle. And I think that that is definitely something that has affected me throughout my life. And then the other very significant thing is that I went to Brazil when I was 19, I believe. And I spent 6 years in Brazil, but also at a time where a lot of people, Brazil went from a lot of instability to a lot of stability in a short space of time. And again, it was another situation like where a lot of people were moving from abject poverty into middle classes, or at least some economic stability. And again, I was just in an environment where I saw people agitating to make life better. So, even before I heard about social design, maybe the way that people practice it here in the United States, I had that experience, particularly from my years in Brazil, where I could see people agitating and using their design skills to get systems to change, to wipe out poverty, to create systems around recycling. And I lived in a city called Curitiba, which is like, let's say the design capital of Latin America. But when I was there as an undergraduate student, that city had three terms of leadership by designers. So, one mayor was an engineer, another mayor was like maybe an urban planner, and another one was, I don't remember if the third one was an architect. But, we talked about design all the time, and we talked about using design for change in that context that I lived in. So I'll definitely say that these are things that have shaped me and made me go down this path instead of designing pretty cars and nice shoes and other stuff. And I actually have colleagues who are doing that stuff. And sometimes I look at them like, wow, I could have been a designer for Volvo, but did I go? No, because I told myself I wanted to change the world. And yeah, so these are some of the inputs.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear the international kind of background and context. And we've got some students from international as well, who found themselves somehow, some way at the University of Illinois. And we've talked about some of like the parental influences, some of the cultural differences that they've pulled from their countries here, and then that they've been able to notice about America and like definitely question that delta. So yeah, thank you for that background. We'll popcorn that same question over to Chris, who I don't think spent much time in his childhood in the Caribbean, but you might surprise me. Maybe I don't know as much about you as I think. So Chris, go ahead and tell us what the origin story was like from your perspective.
Very traditional Midwestern family where it's you're born here, you work here, you die here. Like that was my upbringing. So, you know, going to Wisconsin was a foreign country for us. Yeah, I don't think I didn't leave the country until 2016, like while I was at the D school. That was the first time I ever left the country. It was will not be doing that for my children. That was you know, my father's thing. But yeah, I had not even heard of the design field until my 30s. Um, I have been doing community work, organizing work since I was like 13. You know, I remember organizing a walkout at my high school to fight police brutality and you know, all those things. So, you know, this term of social design is interesting because it was just not a term that I was aware of or a field that I was aware of. It was, you know, you fight for what's right because it's what's right. Um, I eventually got into the nonprofit world in my 20s, and even then, I hadn't heard about it until my 20s. I was like, "Whoa, they'll pay you to do this thing? Like, wow, that's crazy." Um, and so through doing nonprofit, I was working for an organization here in Chicago um, called Mikva Challenge, and we were my role there was to help design. At that time, I wasn't calling it design; it was help to create uh, new pathways for formerly incarcerated young people back into society.
Hmm.
And so, you know, the methodology that I was using was participatory action research, which I had, you know, if you look at design methodologies, very similar, lots of overlap, but still had not heard of design as an approach. Um, and so doing that work, we ended up creating a web app. So as we are talking about, you know, apps to change the world and really reconfigure things, we created an app to help young people expunge their criminal records for free. And what evolved out of that work was state legislation in Illinois for automatic expungement for young people. So this is that's my starting to see like how a thing can then create bigger systems change. So the app led to, you know, the collection of data, you know, a proof point to say people are really trying to do this. Your system is what's holding them back. And so advocating, so then the young people I work with were able to advocate at the state legislature for this automatic expungement. And so I'm telling the story because that work is what caught the attention of like the D school to say, hey, you need to come out here so we can teach you design, and you need to start doing your civic work this way. And so that started my journey down this path. And so um, you know, I really appreciate it. I do see the limitations of it. So, you know, there's lots of discussion around does design thinking replicate or advance white supremacy? I think it advances racism in a lot of ways because it doesn't critically think about the society we're in, and therefore, I think Leslie, to your point around the products and things that we are putting into the world, there isn't a critical analysis of it. So therefore, it's based on this business innovation. Let's do the thing that creates value quickly, and we'll deal with whatever comes from it later if we ever have to deal with it. Because if the bottom line is rising, then you know, I think that's the outlook of a lot of companies right now. So,
Yeah. we've talked a little bit
I
about.
want to, yeah, let me interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
So, you know, I want to pick up on what you just said about, people ask me all the time the same question about, you know, does design or design thinking reinforce white supremacy and whatnot? And I answer that a little bit differently because I think and maybe this ties to the question in the chat, right? I practice design in places that were not white, right? But actually the whole world is white supremacist. That's the thing. And so it's, for me though, I think it's not quite does design or design thinking reinforce white supremacy. It is that we swim in this white supremacist world. And so it means that if we kind of consciously don't, if we are not consciously thinking about the way that we do design, we will replicate, yeah, all of the racism in the world that we actually live in. It's just going to reflect who is using the tools. I tend to say it's not the tool itself, you know, so like every time someone asks, well, how can you use blah, 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 blah? And I'm like, well, hold on a second. It's just a hammer. The hammer isn't racist. It's the person who's using the hammer that's racist. You know, that's one thing that, one way that maybe we could think about it. So that we ask ourselves, how do we make sure, and this is some of the work that Chris is doing, how do we make sure that the work is anti-racist or is anti-oppressive, or, you know, in the way that we do it, so we're not just replicating this world around us as we work.
Yeah.
That's
So
a
can
little
I
bit of a
add to that?
tangent.
Because
Go ahead.
I'm,
Piggyback.
I'm on board with you. I would say the caveat is less, it's not about who uses it. It is about what they're using it for. So an anti-racist can have a hammer and still produce racist outcomes, right? They can still build racist systems if they have not intentionally used that hammer to build anti-racist systems. And so that's why I agree with the critiques that design as is replicates and advances racist notions, racist systems, because I don't think we have the tools. We're still using the hammer that was created by the original architects, and therefore what we can do with it will replicate the things that they intended it to use. Now we have to build new tools so that we can build new systems. So because I think that was the ideology I had, you know, originally, that I I tell the story when my mom called and said, "What the hell are you doing at design school? What do you do?" Which all of you all will get that question if you haven't had it yet. What do you do? And I told her, I said, it feels like they're training me. It says, it feels like rich people want us to go understand poor people to then make them more rich. That was the way that I could break down my design training. And so she said, why do you want to do that? And I said, I don't. I want to learn. I see the value in some of these methodologies, and I want to figure out how to use them to make the world better. And so that was my path. And then I finally kind of got to this point where even with all my best intentions, I was still just designing band-aids and letting the system do what it does because I was still using their tools. And so, you know, that's a lot of what I'm trying to do at the Institute of Design and at Shy by Design. We're constantly trying to figure out what are the new methods we need to create so that designers can produce these anti-racist outcomes.
Yeah, that's amazing, like kind of perspectives about kind of using existing tools, but then also necessitating like brand new tools and reflecting and thinking really critically about what we call the status quo. We've talked a bunch in this class in the early weeks about socialism versus capitalism and how much kind of business and bottom line play into decisions that are made kind of within the world of design and then also kind of outside of it. So yeah, hopefully for some folks that have been rocking with us week by week, this is ringing some bells. But I see a question from Maxine that came into the chat. I want to invite Maxine to come off mute and ask that question if you want to.
Yeah, for sure. So Lesley, in her introduction, she mentioned that she is got her education internationally. So I was wondering if you could just explain a little how you leveraged such a perspective in regards to bolstering your design practice and that how that helped you in your career in the States as well.
Thanks, Maxine. That's a great question. And there's so many ways to answer. Actually, I'm gonna kind of flash a passport here. So I got like a bit by a travel bug really, really early. And it has to do with my parents' outlook on the world, I suppose, or their parenting style, where I wanted to go to university and they wouldn't have been able to have to afford the university that I wanted, but they said, you can study anywhere in the world as long as we don't have to pay for it, right? And so what that meant is that really from early on, I was just excited and interested in exploring the world because I knew that my parents would support me go somewhere else, right? And so I lived in Brazil for 6 years. And then that kind of opened things up for me. And for many years, between 2003 till about 2000 and maybe 2009, I spent quite a bit of time traveling in both Africa and the Caribbean, in different countries doing design work, not doing really very good design work, I will actually admit. And then maybe I could blame other people and say it wasn't my fault. I was just an employee who wasn't pushing back enough. But I was doing like really kind of, I was working in international development. There are opportunities for designers in international development very often to work with people who are doing maybe export handicrafts or somehow related to manufacturing. So I was doing that kind of work and really asking myself a lot of questions along the way. That's actually what got me onto this PhD track, because I eventually asked some questions and I said, ask questions about local expertise and how foreign expertise is valued. So I'm going off on a tangent, but I'll bring it back. But like, I was working in Uganda at one stage, I think in 2005. And one day I kind of just had to, at the start of the project, I had to recognize, whoa, I'm the outsider that they brought in. So they're kind of flashing me around as this outside international expert on this project. But on the very first day, I met a Ugandan woman with like 4 times the expertise that I had, running her own business. I'm like, why aren't you doing this project and why am I doing this project, right? And it's really just the way people value outsider knowledge. And that's eventually the thing that started me on this PhD, because I thought there was too much of that kind of tension in design or in design for development, which used to be the name of a kind of area of design practice. But to come back to the starting question that you asked, because I studied outside of my home country, and because a lot of my professional work was also as an outsider, because I was working as an international consultant, it meant that I always had that outsider perspective everywhere. And it affects the way that you see things, right? And so it has worked both for me and against me. But where this outsider perspective has been very useful, it means that, because then I suppose my perspective in quotes is fresh, it means I can call out things, right? I can see things and see, well, there's the other thing too, that because again, I've also practiced in different places, I have other references that I can use. So like when we go to, like I worked at the D school for a year. If I entered a space at the D school and someone said, well, this is the way we do things, I could kind of say, well, actually, I know how we do it in Brazil. I know how people do it in England. I know how people do it in Uganda. And, you know, so that's one thing that I've really been able to use this international outlook for, you know, where because then I have this wide range of experiences, I've seen things done in different ways. It means that I know that anytime anyone tells me that this is the way it's done, I can clearly say, no, it doesn't have to be done like this because it is done in different ways in other places. And then the other way that this international experience has kind of worked for me is that it has kind of given me a little bit of arrogance, right? I'll say that jokingly, where I've always imagined I could go elsewhere, which is not always true. It could be something in my mind, right? Where I'm like, okay, I have this job now, but I don't have to have this job because I can have a job somewhere else, right? But that idea that I could go elsewhere has also then made me, I guess, strong enough to call things out again, you know? So I've seen things done in other places, and that makes me know that, yes, there's something wrong. But because I've always had that kind of safety of knowing, well, you know, kind of like, if you guys deport me, I'll go somewhere else, right? So that means that I can kind of stand up. I'll use the D school as an example again. Not necessarily pointing fingers at the D school, just as an example, right? But I mean, if I, because I felt I could go somewhere else, I could be brave enough then to say, hey, your design for extreme affordability class doesn't cut it, right? Because I know that, which is really just, I think, it's not even real, but I think I could get a job somewhere else easily. So that kind of gives me the safety of being critical of places and people and whatnot, whereas sometimes other people don't have that safety and feel intimidated about calling systems out, saying where things need to be better. So I think that I could stop here for a bit, but that's that external career or life has given me that confidence to be able to be critical and to suggest new ways of doing things.
Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks for answering that one. And you brought up something interesting, which is, I guess I'll call it courage to kind of speak truth and not be afraid to represent your perspective. And Chris, like having met, you know, your activist mom and dad, and like you have like a courage as well. Talk to me about how the community has helped to like cultivate that courageousness. You mentioned earlier, like just doing the thing because it's the right thing to do versus like considering, you know, this long laundry list of repercussions or maybe consequences. How have you leaned on your community, or how they poured into you to cultivate that courageousness?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Because, you know, at the end of the day, we're all a sum of our parts, right? We're all a manifestation of all the people who have helped make us who we are. Whether that's through intelligence, whether that's through personality, whatever the case may be, we are an outcome of that. And I am always inspired and in awe of the folks that I have been in an activist spaces with. You know, my father worked at the post office, so we weren't well to do. We were very, you know, middle class, but we weren't questioning. I never questioned where my next meal was coming from. As long as he was working, we were eating every day. The bills were paid. We had a house. Well, we didn't have a house. We had an apartment. We had a place to live is the main thing. And I've been in so many spaces with people that those basic needs were questioned. It wasn't a given that they were going to have that every day. And even with that instability or that ambiguity, if we want to use, you know, design language, that ambiguity of life, they were still on the front lines. I remember going to Ferguson and, you know, people just standing up to the police with a fearlessness that I just hadn't seen before. Minneapolis, same thing. And that has taught me to be more courageous, that if they can stand in front of a Bearcat police tank, I can be in a meeting and say, yo, you're fucking racist right now. Or I'm not gonna do that. You know, like some of my team is here and we turn down work because it does not align with who we are as an organization. Um, you know, a client who was a current client asked us to help out with some of their work at the border for the child migrant crisis that was happening. And we said, absolutely not, because there was no way design could be used to make that anti-racist. No matter what we did, the outcome would be racist, because at the end of the day, they were not going to return these children to their parents. And that was the solution. So we can use design all day to get around, you know, the thing that actually needs to happen. But, you know, we weren't going to get to the thing. And so, you know, that has helped me to toe a particular line, and not compromise who I am personally. And then luckily I have a great team that reflects those values as well. And so we can collectively say, you know what, it's just not worth it for us to be a part of that.
Yeah, that's good to kind of have the students in the community here. Like sometimes the resourcing and like what you could gain from something is going to be great, but if it means kind of losing kind of part of your soul for it, or it goes against the mission and the vision and the values you set for the organization in the very beginning, like it's totally worth walking away from. So yeah, again, I'll ask the audience, if you've got questions, feel free to continue to put them in the chat. One that came to me like out of band that I'm looking at in Slack here, Lesley, I'll come over to you, is about your definition of human-centered design. Like, I know we use language and we use narratives and story a lot, but like, what's your personal definition of human-centered design?
Why are you asking me hard questions? So I guess if I had to define it, I would say that, yeah, we are trying to understand really the needs, the issues, the pains, the hurts, the wants of humans, and then respond to that, right? So I mean, that's like a general thing. I don't use, so my challenge with human-centered design is which humans, right? I think that if you're going to use this human-centeredness, oh, actually, let me backtrack a little bit, right? So one thing about being then this designer for a long time is that I can see when we became human-centered, and that's actually interesting, because when I was in school, I hate to say it, we didn't care about humans, right? We weren't designing for humans. We were designing around efficiency, around aesthetics, around, you know, we would maybe even we were starting to design around sustainability, but the humans were just kind of like, oh, you know, they were a little bit inconvenient in the product design, right? And so the shift to human-centeredness, which I will say, I mean, I guess don't cite me on this, but I think it really kind of happened around 2006 that we started to really focus on this human-centeredness. And so in principle, I think the human-centeredness is good, but I think in reality, there is the question about which humans, you know, if you are going to say human-centered design, which human is more important than which human? And I think that is problematic. So in one of the classes that I teach in particular, and there are a couple of other people who think like this, not a couple, a lot of other people, is that if you are focusing on humans, you need to figure out how you're choosing the humans to focus on. And then you probably need some kind of guiding principle to get you to that place. And so like the guiding principle in the work that I do is about oppression. So it's like kind of like laser focusing on oppressions and then solving in quotes for the human that is most oppressed, right? Which is kind of pompous language, because maybe it's not even that process of us solving for them, you know, it is, but it's then framing the question around the people, the humans that are most oppressed, and then knowing that once we have dealt with those issues, that everyone else will be supported, right? So if we think about, like, there was a class that I taught once, and I was trying to teach this same concept, and I said something that really upset a student, but I really was, this is what I wanted to say, where I said, okay, if we were designing in New Orleans, and I said, you need to be designing for me, a Black woman, single parent, teaching in one place, my child is on another part of the city, I am somehow juggling everybody's schedule. And, you know, so, I mean, I was kind of maybe turning myself into a caricature, but I wanted the students to understand that solving the issue of transportation for the millennial who has no kids, who is upper middle class, who, you know, is not doing anything to create change, right? But when we are then really focusing on the person who is juggling a couple of jobs, so I don't only focus on race, I talk about race a lot, but I want us to find the oppression. So the class that I really love at NC State, we spend the entire semester talking about oppressions with an S. And then we talk about race, class, gender identity, disability, and, you know, and so as we start to see all of the things that are keeping people back, we start to see, okay, actually, we need to frame our design problems around kind of stamping out these oppressions. And then that will, so when I think of human-centeredness, it's that, maybe it's oppression-centeredness that I'm thinking of, or other people call it equity-centeredness. So yeah, that is a lot of rambling, but maybe it gets you to understand my point of view on this.
No, that's helpful to get the background and the context there. And you know, Chris, the question that came to me to follow that one for you is like, maybe extending the definition of human-centered design. Like, we have to take what we learn and kind of turn it into something that we can systematically move forward and like go into the world and make impact. So what was it for you that had you leaning into entrepreneurship and kind of standing up your own business versus, you know, like Lesley Ann's path to go to a university and to teach kind of students and maybe seed the field and try to like replicate these ideas and have them go out and do work? What was it that kind of put you on the path that you're currently on by building Shy by Design?
Sure. Anger, to be quite honest. When I got back to Chicago and started working here, you know, I was working with philanthropies around different social issues, and that was cool, but they didn't quite know what to do with me. They were still putting me in the box of like, oh, make us a flyer because you can make it look good. And I was like, all right, I can do far more for you than that, but okay, you don't get it. And I vividly remember taking the train home and being on LinkedIn and seeing like this really cool project in Inglewood around health. And then, so it was like, you know, the social sector is at that time, like 2016, is starting to really understand design can help out. And so all of a sudden, everything was design. And I see this project and I see the firm doing it. So I click the link and it is all white dudes and like I think it was one Asian woman. And I was just like, yeah, they'll never get it right. There's no way in hell they can get it right. Inglewood is like 99% Black community in Chicago. Um, and so there was just no way they could understand the folks in this neighborhood because they haven't gone through it, right? You know, we do ethnographic research, which is a good approach, but you don't understand. You bring your sensibilities to that research, and the sense making is based on your sensibilities, right? So you're not going to get it. And I experienced that firsthand when I was in at the D school. That you know they just couldn't understand some of the nuances that were uh, present in the work. And so at that moment, I was just like, all right, I got to create something for us. There has to be a place where Black and brown designers can come so that we can do these bigger projects. And so that was the impetus for starting Shot by Design. Just like we got to have something. And then it was, we also need a home where we can be comfortable to grow. That those spaces they don't afford us the ability to be ourselves, to become as great as we're supposed to be. They typically stifle us, right? Men, women, or you know, people of color and women, right? Regardless of your race. And so we just needed a space that was not gonna do that. And so started Shot by Design, which then led me to academia, right? The dean of ID came to a workshop I was doing and was like, all right, our students need to know what you're doing and how you're doing it. And so that that got me into now teaching for the past 4 years, how to do this differently, how to work with communities differently, which then, you know, developed my research agenda around creating anti-racist design. Yeah.
Yeah, that totally answers the question and kind of gets me kind of an understanding. Like we've got emotions for a reason. So I'm glad to know that you kind of channeled that initial anger into something that is productive and impactful kind of right now in the local community, and then hopefully in the future, like the broader state in the nation. And part of what you're saying is like the impetus for me creating this class too. Like introduction to social design is the first time that we put it on, and the idea that we could actually bring people from the community who are actually doing the work and able to talk about it, but then also walking the walk was important to me in bringing this experience. So
Sure.
yeah.
Sorry, can I touch on something Lesley said?
Yep.
Because I completely agree. As you know, when you were talking about the human-centered design, like, so the work that I'm teaching, that we're doing, is really about issues, right? To your point, that we're issue-focused design, which you know is the tools. Again, if you think about human-centered design, we have a persona. Like these are the ways in which we classify people. And it is a lot harder to do that classification even within a racial category. So if we're talking about racism, the effects of racism on Black people, if you just think about that race, the personas are varied amongst that spectrum. And so, you know, it's less about human-centered design in that respect, I think, and more to your point around the issue. How are we eliminating the issue from the context so that that population can thrive? And so, you know, I think human-centered design, again, very much focused on advancing capitalism and business. If we talk about humans and the human center, it's really the human in their relationship to the object or the service. That is all we actually care about in the protocol. If we're developing an ethnographic research protocol, is tell me about your relationship to this very narrow thing. The toothbrush, or the dental experience, right? We're not asking about or even, you know, especially if we understand structural racism or sexism, if we then if it emerges from the conversation that travel to the dentist is a problem, then we're like, oh, aha, right? The aha moment. Most of us knew that already, that was part of the problem. We just didn't, factor it in. And so I think when you factor in, if you focus on the issue, that will absolutely be part of your research protocol, and it won't be an aha moment. It will be a matter of fact for the new development of the dental experience. But for so many people, they would, even if it comes up, they'll overlook it. They'll just go straight to, okay, we can't solve that, so let's go to the toothbrush, the I don't know, whatever case, a new mouth guard because you're drooling too much, right? And then we have a new product that can sell rather than addressing the issue, the main issue.
Yeah, that's a bar actually, just because the aha that we sometimes come to isn't like the right aha. I guess I wish I had a better, more elegant way to say that, but
yeah, you're often not going to come to the right aha. And maybe we have to be really intentional. And I'm probably just going to repeat some of what Chris is saying, about we have to be intentional about, well, whose question or whose aha we're interested in. And then who is involved in the team that is responding to that question as well, so one issue with human-centered design that I have is that I think a lot of people in this space like to talk about, well, again, this is the way things are done, right? And I would encourage your audience, your students, your collaborators to really question things and figure out, okay, what are the methods that really make sense for us, whoever us is, and then how are we going to tweak methods to get there? Because there are a lot of people, again, I'll bring the around the world thing, there are a lot of people around the world who do really good design without using a journey map, without thinking about a persona, without, so sometimes these tools that come into the conversations where people say, well, you have to do this to get to your problem statement, and then this, and then that, and some of this stuff is kind of made up, and we can challenge this, or we can make new things, and these new things can make more sense and lead to better outcomes. So just something to think about. Anytime someone says this is a process, I would encourage everyone to ask why, and who does this process serve, and what does a better version of this process look like? And then just write about that. I mean, just use that other process. I said write about it because I'm an academic, but I mean, use your other process and talk about that other process so that other people could know, oh, there are other processes that we could lean into. We don't have to get into these made up personas and stuff like that.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I wanted to take a little bit of a 20-second timeout and go into a little bit of a rapid fire, just some fun facts about both of y'all. We talked a little bit about travel. I mean, we haven't talked about soca and music and saltfish and we can go there, but I would like to just rattle off a couple questions to get a sense of kind of where our guests are in terms of just fun facts about them. So ladies first again, Lesley Ann, we'll start with you. What's your favorite thing to eat, and maybe your favorite music to dance to currently?
Okay, so favorite music is easy. Favorite music, the answer is always soca, right? And the favorite artist is always, well, actually, someone just took his place, but Marshall Montano is the favorite artist. There's another singer who's I have on rotation, a guy called Blacks from Trinidad. He passed recently, and so his music just kind of came into rotation again. But yeah, Marshall Montano every year does a song that is like kind of really uplifting. And so this year his song was called The Happiest Man Alive. No, it's not Happiest Man Alive, it's Happy Pappy. But you know, it's just like happy music. So 7 o'clock in the evening, I put that on and I run around. Y'all are gonna laugh. I run around my table for 40 minutes. That's how I get my exercise. And yes, Marshall's music is amazing. So that's the thing. And then the food. So I am in Trinidad at the moment, as I said. Oh, fun fact, I'm quarantining, but I tested negative finally today. And we can't wait to get out of my quarantine jail to go and have some roti
Yes.
and some bacon shark. So now I'm gonna hand it over to Chris.
Yeah.
Favorite music, still hip hop. Most Def is still favorite artist. Food, that feels hard. I'm into smoking now. I've officially hit my like old man stage. I sit in front of a grill for like 10 hours and that is a happy day for me. So I think I'm gonna go with beef ribs. They're like massive ribs. And I'm pretty good at ribs, so I enjoy a good rib.
That's very Midwest answer of you, my friend.
All of
Yeah, I will invite people who are on right now to give a little background too. Like, what's your favorite, current genre of music, and then favorite thing to eat? Just give Lesley Ann and Chris a little context about what you like and what you eat. And I'll diverge into just a little bit of a story. Just when I first got to the Bay Area from graduating from U of I and going west, moved in with this older family, and they were from Trinidad and Tobago. So this lady, like 65 or 66 years old, kind of took me in as her son. And for 2 years almost, I lived in her house and like commuted, back to San Jose and back. And she would feed me pilau and saltfish, and like she would have soca music on in the house all the time. And it was like my family away from my family for that first couple of years here in the Bay Area. So for y'all who didn't know that about me, I had, a little bit of
You have Trini roots.
yeah, a little bit of black and red on my roots just by virtue of being in a household like that for a couple of years. So
Very nice.
that's awesome. Well, yeah, I'll keep it going. Got just another couple of questions, maybe about futurism and stuff that you would like to see, as a result of the work that you're putting out there and the things that you're doing. We talked a little bit in this class about speculative design, like way out there thinking, and then kind of the difference between that and designing for the N+1, like the next iteration. But if we put our speculative caps on, Lesley Ann, coming to you for this one, like what's the future that you would want, as you're teaching your students, the thing that you want for them to come to, or the thing that you want like society to be able to achieve by virtue of what we're kind of doing day by day?
That's such a hard question. Well, before I answer, to buy myself some time, I suppose, I use futures framing in a lot of my classes, and I push people to the really far out future intentionally, because if we design for the N+1, people think of the limits, but when you're designing for something in 2073, we could just say, oh, well, the technology hasn't been designed yet, but here's the thing, and people get a lot more creative and free in their suggestions when we do that. So, I think that one, every designer needs to be using a lot of futurism, and also diverse futurisms in the work that they do. So there is, like typical futurism might not represent us as people of color, or and well, find the futurism that does and bring that into your design practice, right? And so the future that I'm very interested in on a few levels. So you heard me talking about a little bit of the work that I do with people in education and that what I do with people in public health. I'm very excited about design completely leaving this kind of product space and going into these other spaces where we are, so we validated the way that we think and work and act and whatnot as designers, but then that gives us space to move into any discipline. That's what I teach people who are not discipline specific designers, and I have to tell them that they can work in any field. They can bring their design abilities to any field, and I want them to always talk about change, and just making a lot of change, being very disruptive, and just dreaming of new futures where other people can't dream of. Other people have forgotten about playfulness and dreaming, but maybe that's what we as designers can take to anything. I'm getting a little wishy-washy, so I'm gonna hand it over to Chris now. And I saw Chris pick up a big red book, right?
Yeah, before Chris goes, just to that point about design being able to extend across so many different disciplines, put your major or your area of focus into the chat, just so that Lesley Ann and Chris can take a look at the diversity of kind of majors and like disciplines that we've got.
Yeah, I wanted to see that. And I also wanted to see if anyone was not from the university, if you had people from outside, if they could also say like, what's their role?
Yeah, sure thing. So while Chris is answering, that same question about futurism, feel free to go into the chat and add your major or, the focus of your work in the area that you work in. So yeah, popcorn over to you, Chris.
Cool. Yes, I was picking up this awesome book that Lesley Ann and great folks curated called The Black Experience in Design. If you haven't gotten it, you should get it. It is 70 brilliant people coming together to talk about what design is, what it could be, what it should be. And I was able to contribute an essay in that, and I explicitly talk about what I want my students to come away with through one of my courses called The Politics of Design. And, I said that design is a political act, and that we have to be intentional about understanding our own politics. So part of the course is interrogating what is your worldview. When I say politics, I'm talking about worldview, not who you vote for. I could care less if you vote Democrat or Republican. But what is the worldview you hold? And therefore, how are you using design to advance that worldview? So I heard you talk about talking about socialism and capitalism, and there are other socioeconomic systems out there, and so that have different value systems, right? And so what are those that you agree with, disagree with? And if you agree with something, part of the class I tell them is also, I want to build up their confidence to fight for that. That, the students that come out of ID will be design leaders. Like that is that program. They will go on to big companies and be in leadership roles. And so I need them to understand what are their limits. Mm-hmm. If you believe in sustainability, are you going to keep designing plastic products? Mm-hmm. If you believe in anti-racism, are you going to keep designing things that, I bring up the Aunt Jemima pancake product. 6 redesigns of that product over the course of the brand. Design teams were part of that. And so people on those teams did not say, this is not for me. We're not going to do it. And so we were able to perpetuate and make racism palatable in different ways, right? And so I want the students who come out of my classes to be able to be confident enough to say no.
Mm.
And I think we have to, yeah, literally palatable, right? And so I think that's part of our responsibility as educators. So I did education before higher ed, and um, in the American system, a lot of the evaluation of educators are grades, pass, fail, these quantitative metrics. And for me, it is always, who are they as people when they leave
Mm.
my class? If my students went on to become beat their spouse, I failed. I don't care if they know trigonometry. If they are not good people, that is where I failed at. And so, I think that has to be part of the design pedagogy as well. What type of designers are we passing on into the world?
Yeah, that's a great point. Um, the last question that I really have for each of you, and again, if you are in the audience and you've got something, feel free. The last question that I wanted to wrap our conversation up with is the one about advice for your younger selves and things that you would have told yourself maybe, when you're in the student shoes or the community member shoes, whether that's a decade ago or longer or shorter. But I always find this question pretty interesting, and we can wrap with this one. So Lesley Ann, I'll come over to you for words to your younger self, AKA maybe advice for folks that are on the call today.
So the advice for my younger self might probably discredit my entire career. Because so yes, I have this political awareness and consciousness and whatnot, but I used to stay away from skill building. Like there were a lot of times in my design career that I didn't want to get my hands dirty. And so my advice to my younger self would be to try harder in that area and experiment more. So I mean, I did reasonably design work, but I would always kind of skirt around things like the prototyping, or skirt around even things like sometimes the community engagement, and I work with people. I now work with cities as well in some of the research that I do, and I see the same kind of timidness that I might have had at that time, where you're trying to see how to get this work done by just sitting in front of this computer and not leaving your room. And so my advice to my younger self would have been to really get out a lot more, get my hands dirty in the studios that I've always had access to, and I didn't go in or go out and talk with people in the community and really get those interviews and build those relationships and things like that. So I mean, I'm good at relationships, but I think that I really could have been much more active. Some of the work that I do, I want to be a little passive, and I want the work to fit in this laptop in front of me. And I think that that's the push that I would have given myself. And I would tell a lot of people, because I see it in the students and the people that I work with, that they're also kind of holding back and trying to see, can we just Google this? And it's not that, there is this world outside of Google, outside of our homes, not homes, well, outside of our homes, outside of our phones. And we have to really experience that to be good designers.
Yeah, thank you. Same question over to you, Mr. Rudd. And I see one more question came into the chat, so we'll ask that one right after.
Cool. It's funny because I literally just asked my students this on Wednesday, yesterday. I think I'll switch up my answer though. And I think this is something that I'm seeing more of, and I definitely was guilty of it. Is that the best leaders know when to follow. And so, I think with design, the level of detail we all put into the work, we get very attached to it, and we want to, fight for it because we think it's the best. And I think we have to really work on being able to step back and say, okay, I think to Leslie Ann's point around like the international perspective, I encourage, we have a lot of international students at ID, and it's hard for them to participate sometimes because I think, they feel like everything is American centered, which I'm sure it is. But I always try to encourage that participation because I've studied racism a lot, but I understand it very much from an American perspective. And I know there's different perspectives to try to understand this from. And so I want to hear their thoughts, their experiences on what this thing is and how it manifests. And so, that's me taking, even though I'm the teacher, I am taking a student approach. I'm following their lead in that moment. And I think as we're on design teams and all that, even if you become, leads of a team or leads at an organization, being able to step back and learn from your team is a tremendous asset to your leadership abilities, and your design capabilities, that when to listen as much as you're talking.
2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right?
Right.
All right. Well, thank you for both fancying us for that answer to that question. So I'm going to invite Carolina, if you want to come off mute and ask this very last question and get some inputs on it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking of questions that I'd like to ask you guys, and something I thought of was, what do you guys think of really just anything that's really common today that you think we'll look back on and see it was obviously an issue of social design or something that social design would fix?
I got one.
You got one. Okay, you start.
I think the reliance on technology to solve social problems is it's not the way. If we're thinking about technology on how to enhance social connections, sure. But I feel like what I've seen a lot lately is like, there's an app for that. We can fix that with some AI. We can fix that with an algorithm. These things are not going to solve the major issues of our time. And so, and I feel like we're doubling down on it because it's easily quantifiable. There's a huge market for it. If we think about social sector, I see a lot of smart cities as the big wave. So we want to put a sensor in everything to manage and regulate human interactions. And it's like, there's far more. I mean, the metaverse launched, and like within a week, there was like a, obscene sexism happening in the metaverse. Like, this technology is not going to solve these issues that we have in our society. And so we have to be thinking about, how are we repairing the social connections, the relationships amongst people? And then maybe like technology can help us get somewhere else. But the techno solutionists, I think, we're going to look back on that and be like, why the hell did we create so much tech?
That's a good one, Chris. Actually, so like I was gonna I'll tell you the original response and then the response to respond to Chris, right? So the original response I want you, everyone as design people to know is that once people are complaining about something, the problem isn't necessarily the people. There is some kind of design issue in there that we have to figure out what is, and then react to that, right? But a little story based on, building off of what Chris said. I did a class once with students in Trinidad and students at Stanford, in California. And they had to sit and kind of interview each other and then make some kind of grand statement about, okay, we are diagnosing these people with whatever issue. And it was really interesting that the students in Trinidad, well, I'm Trinidadian, so obviously I have a bias towards what they said, but they said, those people in California are so lonely. And I kind of was taken aback, but they were, what struck them, the students in Trinidad, was the lack of relationships and the lack of connectivity that people in, well, these students were all in Silicon Valley, but they were really struck by that. And so since they talked about that, that had me thinking, oh, so how could the loneliest people in the world be designing things like about connectivity? You know, how could the loneliest people in the world, and this is me, that's an overstatement, but you know, it did come up in the class, how could the loneliest people in the world be designing Facebook, for example? Or, you know, it's really that people who understand relationships and connectivity, and, you know, these are the people who need to be designing Facebook. So Facebook needs to be designed in Latin America because people in Latin America understand family, or, you know, but I think, yeah, when we look back, so this is, yes, building on what Chris says, when we look back at the loneliness of people in this time, we will probably see, oh, it really was a design issue, that their worlds weren't designed with enough. We could have addressed it through better design and making sure that, and not just through apps and things like that, just entire lives, you know, like the job has to be designed better so that you aren't lonely, or, you know, all of these things have to be designed better. So I think that, yeah, that could be the thing that we think, or all the mental health issues that people talk about. Again, it could be that some of these are design issues, or issues that could be solved with a really intentional kind of design activity. And I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, that's some great feedback. Hopefully that answers the question there, and it's given like new context to a statement that I heard in a different conversation, but the statement was hurt people hurt people. And to the concept that, you know, you're a lonely, maybe software developer who's, you know, got biases or like lived experiences and not enough social connection and empathy for who you're designing for. Is it any like surprise to us that what kind of permeates from what you're designing has unintended consequences, and you know, you've caused as much maybe chaos and damage as you have goodness for some population of people? So yeah, thank you for that. We're gonna transition over a little bit into selfie time. So let me go off to share, and like we always do right around the end, we're gonna pause for some smiles here and try to get y'all out of here in a few minutes. So feel free, if you want to come off of non-video mode and onto camera, and I'll give y'all 5, 4, and 3, and 2, and 1. Here we go. All right. Well, on behalf again of the Siebel Center for Design here at the University of Illinois, thank you so much, Lesley Ann, for coming through, and for Chris, bringing yourself and the crew. It's been fascinating to kind of hear from you, and we're wishing you from our class, you know, to your businesses and to your classrooms, all the best and all the success and all the sunshine and all of the breaking out of the quarantine that you're in, Lesley Ann. Have a great rest of the week and weekend. And yeah, we just appreciate you so much. Let me throw, everybody feel free to throw some emoji and some cheer in for our special guest for today. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks for bringing us together.
Yeah. All right. Well, like we always say, until next time, was it? Drink water, mind your business, be graceful with yourself, wear your mask, I guess, so you can stay healthy. And yeah, we'll see everyone next Thursday for our next community conversation. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.